Oh, good. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Yes. And now let us give charity. Yesterday I forgot to give charity. It's a duck one. There we go. No. All right, let's give charity. Of course. Even the smallest amount is good. Start the day off with something good, especially start today off with words of Torah. So we're learning the mimer from Torah Orm. We're talking about what God is. And how it is that how could it possibly that God is creating us and we don't feel it? And the Rebbe is saying that not only is he creating us, but there's all these spiritual worlds and spiritual levels that God is also creating. He's creating everything. What's he creating it from? So somehow he's creating it from his light, from his power, from his word, from himself, because there's nothing except for God. So in other words, this does not in any way detract from God's oneness. Let's say an example, for instance, you take one and one is two, but you write it down on a piece of paper. Does that detract from mathematics? I mean, you used it, here it is, it's on a piece of paper. Does that detract in any way from mathematics? Because you manifested some of the numbers that were in potential. Of course it doesn't, that's ridiculous. Well, something like that, but in a sort of an opposite way, is with God, because here with the mathematics is the numbers that you write down on the paper. In some ways, they're more real than mathematics. Is just an idea, and here this is real. But by God, it works the other way around. By us, we're sort of like the idea, and God is what's really real. What's really real? The reason I brought that example is because we're just a manifestation of something that's infinitely bigger than we are. And so, okay, so but it's not really bigger because we're using terms that relate to this world. So really the only proper word you can use, like the Rambam uses, Maimonides, that we are true, but God is the truth of truth. His truth is nothing like our truth. Because his reality is infinitely more real than our reality. Okay, so the Rebbe explains, this is what we've been talking about. So we have to understand who we're praying to when we pray. First of all this cannot detract from the fact that God does have a personality and God does answer our prayers. And here we're saying that God's personality and that God answers our prayers, that's only aspects of God. Here he calls it garments of God, or let's say precious jewelry, like a person has these really attached to. You're only using those examples to let us know about what it means when we say that God is one. What it means when we say that God is one. When we say that God is one, it doesn't mean that there's only one God and there's no more gods except for one. But there's also a world. The world exists and we exist. We say that God is one, we mean reality is one. Reality. And reality is nothing like what we think. Our reality is just a small wisp of a remembrance of what is reality. I mean, just to give you an example, let's say, for instance, somebody wants to know what is mathematics. Say 1 and 1 is 2. That's mathematics. That's all mathematics. That's the whole thing. There's no more than that. That's mathematics. 1 and 1 is 2. What about 2 and 2 is 4? And now you're getting. I'm going to talk about that. 2 and 2 is 4. That's not really mathematics. That's just mathematics is 1 and 1 is 2. That's mathematics. Of course, that's ridiculous to say a thing like that. Well, to say that what we see with our eyes and what we feel is real, that's all there is to reality, is infinitely more ridiculous. Because there's all these upper spiritual worlds that we have no conception of. In fact, we have no conception of just the spiritual world, which is just directly above, so to speak, ours. And then there's spiritual worlds above that the spiritual world that's above ours, that they don't have any awareness of. It's too great. That's why it says that the angels say 3 times, that God is holy, holy, holy. It's like his reality is 3 levels removed from their reality. So it's like you tell somebody, listen, what is mathematics? Very simple. 1 and 1 is 2. What about 4 and 4 is 8? Nah, that's not. Well, I got news for you. Listen, here's a big professor. Here's a big rabbi, somebody you really trust. Listen to this. Listen to what he says. 4 and 4 is 8 is also mathematics. Whoa, really? I didn't know that. Not only that, you have 4 times 4 is 16. Where did you get that from? Where did you get that? That's called multiplying. Ooh. Whoa, I didn't know that. That's really amazing. Then there's what's called algebra. Then there's what's called trigonometry. Then there's calculus. Then there's so all these different levels. And this doesn't touch mathematics at all. It doesn't detract from mathematics. The same thing. What we're looking at in the world is like thinking that all mathematics is 1 and 1 plus 1 is 2. Excuse me. Which is ridiculous, right? And so we see the upper worlds. Upper worlds, that's like, oh, there's multiplication. Whoa, that's real. That's also not reality. Then there is, I mean, you can see that I'm weak in what mathematics really is. Then there's algebra. Ooh, then geometry. Then there's algebra. Wow, this stuff is really spacey. This is really amazing. I can't believe it. It's just reality. Well, that's just talking about one small aspect of reality, mathematics. Mathematics is just one small aspect of reality, right? Mathematics doesn't touch on the spiritual worlds at all. Mathematics doesn't apply in spiritual worlds. I think even according to mathematics, there's other theories of mathematics. So it only applies in very, very limited cases. Then there's the same thing we're talking about God, but it's not the same thing because with God, we're talking about true reality. And we're talking about our creator that creates us. Mathematics doesn't create anything. We're talking about the creator that he creates us. So we're trying to understand how real and amazing, impressive, and what's the word for it? Inspiring should be the awareness of what God is. This is the God of Abraham that God revealed. That Abraham revealed. And this God spoke to Abraham. So God is not this spiritual amorphous power that's above all being. That's like in the Eastern religions. That's what they think. God actually spoke and he actually appeared. He appeared to the Jewish people. He gave the Jewish people a book, personally gave them a book, what he spoke to Moses, a whole book. And the first 2 of the 10 commandments, they heard themselves. So this is not like any other God that you can, of any other religion or whatever is philosophy or whatever. This is the God who's creating you. He's creating everything. He's creating time. He's creating all the spirit. And he cares about us and he can speak to us. And that's basically what the Torah is, God speaking to us. Okay. So the Rebbe explains, how does this come to be? I mean, how has this come to be? I mean, God is one. So how does all this diversity? So he says that's the idea. Oh, this is just awful. So that's the idea of the Sfirot, of the 10 Sfirot. Of the 10 Sfirot, those are 10 aspects of God's wisdom, God's, etc. And the worlds that these Sfirot manifest themselves in. There's the 10 Sfirot of Atzilut and 10 Sfirot of Bria and Yetzirah and Asiya. All right. This is what the Zohar is talking about, and that's the introduction to the Zohar, and that's one of the big purposes of Chabad Hasidut is to explain this in a way that will be inspiring to us, that will come to love God and fear God and do his commandments. That's the main thing in the end, doing the commandments, but appreciating whose commandments we're doing. Okay, here we go. So in this sentence from that Elijah the prophet is speaking to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he's talking about what God is. And he says, Ant, you God, Ant Uchad, God, you are one, but it's not a numerical one. What does it mean God is one and he's not a numerical one? And other places we say in our prayers also in the morning, Hu Echad Adon Olam, well-known prayer. Hu Echad Be'ein Sheni L'Hachbira Hamshil Lo L'Hachbira. God is one and there's no number two. In other words, God is one, but there's nothing except for God. So, of course, if there's nothing except for God, then how can we say that God is one? That he's not. There's in order for there to be a one, there has to be a number two. There has to be a zero, and then there's a one, and then there's a two. So we say that's right. You're right, 100%, according to what we think. But God is not that way. God is one. He's the true oneness. He's true existence, and there's nothing else except for him. One second, we just finished talking about the 10 sfirot. What about that? That's exists, doesn't it? It says that's what Elijah the prophet is telling to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. God is one, and there's lo bechushban, but he's not a numerical one. She'enu nimna, that he's not reckoned beklala eser sfirot. He is not reckoned in the 10 sfirot, which begin with chachma bina v'dad. When we're talking about this, but God does emanate these 10 sfirot, and it doesn't change him at all, right? Just like we said, mathematics emanates numbers, but it doesn't change mathematics at all, because it's not exactly a good comparison, but it's not bad, not a bad comparison. So God, you are one, and you emanate. Again, the reason why is because in mathematics, these are all just ideas. And here we're talking about reality, that we are real, and the upper worlds are infinitely more real. And the creator is infinitely more real. And this we can't really measure. We don't know the levels of reality. The example the Rebbe gave a few times is like going to sleep and then waking up. When you're asleep, you think that you're in reality. And then when you wake up, you realize that it wasn't, it was only a dream. So it says that this world is something like a dream. We think it's really reality, but in fact, it's not really reality. It's just like a wisp of reality. Just like dreams are sort of they participate. What is it? They utilize things that are real in real life. Also, this world utilizes things that are in the upper worlds, upper sphirot. So when it says that God, you are one, so God creates this whole business, all with all the infinite worlds and levels and spheres. That would refers to God, you are one. So it's obviously talking about it's talking to God. So, I mean, there must be something else to God if you're talking to God, you. So it means there must be a me, and there's a you. So this is a mystery. This is a mystery, and it refers to a level which is called Keter Elyon, the upper crown of God. Hamamutza, this is the connector, bein a matzil, between the emanator, between the essence of God, the ne'atzalim, and the emanations of God, the 10 sfirot. She'ein aroch alav, there's no way you can possibly compare or describe what God is. Ki ta'avuta chachma, because the level which we call chachma, which that's the highest level of godliness, that's chachma, is like we said before, it's life, or in our personality, it's like faith, something that's totally above us, above anything we can possibly understand. It's above understanding. That level of chachma, it also has a source, and its source is this level of keter, the crown. Just like chachma is in the brain, this is part of the brain's wisdom, and the crown is above that. So to speak, also by godliness, the aspect of keter is infinitely more real than the highest aspect of God. He me'ir, this level of keter, in order to create this level of chachma, he me'ayin mamish. It comes, chachma comes from nothing all the time. The loka seder ishtalslos, it is not like the whole chain of creation, which is one thing coming from another. Okay, the upper worlds. How does it work in the upper worlds? When we're praying to God, and we're praying to God's kindness, and we're praying to God's power, and we're praying to God's mercy. So these are aspects we're praying to God that God should emanate. Who is God that we're praying to that he should emanate these? Well, he says that's called the essence of God, or another name of that is God's crown, Keter. God's crown, the upper crown of God. Keter is another name for God's will. Will. And just like in a human personality, willpower is above your personality. Willpower might be determined by what you like and what you don't like, but will itself, pure will, is like coming from your essence. Coming from the essence. They just take an example: a person that goes into a coma, and he's laying there with his eyes open, whatever, his mouth open. He's just totally right. He's not connected to the world at all. Not connected. Doesn't see anything, whatever. And suddenly he says, "Oh," somebody says, "Would you want some water?" Oh, he's alive. He's alive. He wants something. He has desire. It doesn't tell who he is. It doesn't say what he wants. He wants water just like a cat wants water, like whatever is an ant wants water. Right? He wants water. And what does it show? Right? It shows that he's alive. That's called the level of keter, will. He wants something. The same thing with God. We pray to God. We're asking God, please, we're trying to arouse Yehi Ratzon. May it be your will that you be kind, you be powerful, you be merciful. So that's crown is another name for God's will. Hine, B'kol Olamot, all the worlds, Atzilut, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, there is also a level of Keter. Because Keter is a connection between one world and another world. Like we said before, all these worlds are infinitely more real than the world below them. This world is the least real of all the worlds. Right? And here, specifically, God put us because in this world we can do the commandments. The commandments are only here. And here we can transform to show that this world, even though that spiritually it's the lowest, but as far as God's will goes, this is the highest. This is where God wants to be. Key, Malchut Atzilut, because the level, so in each one of these four dimensions of reality, each more real than the level below it, there's what's connected. If it's infinitely more real than the level below it, what connects it? So it says there's always this level of crown, of the Keter, will. Because again, each one of these worlds, I'm just telling you what I understand. I'm not telling you what I'm experiencing or that I'm somehow or other, in like Moses or something. The upper worlds, the upper worlds are real. They're alive. The upper worlds are alive. The words of God create this world. As real as this world is, with the sun moving around and the planets and the animals and our consciousness and all these things, with the angels and all this stuff, that comes from God's letters. So the letters are more alive than the world is. They're more real than the world is. They don't have free choice. They do exactly what God wants. But on the other hand, they're infinitely more real. Even the angels, which are just creations, they're infinitely more alive than we are. It says that if a person would see an angel, he would die from fright because it's more real than we are. And so our reality, so to speak, when if a person would see an angel, our reality becomes dissolved in the reality of an angel. So we're talking about levels that are infinitely more real than ours. And these levels, a person can think that's basically what all the religions in the world are. Somebody gets a revelation of one of these upper levels, these worlds, and he says, that's God, that's the Lord, I am the chosen one. And he writes a whole book, a Bible or whatever it is, and millions of followers because they don't feel anything. And he felt, this leader of what a religion, he feels one spiritual level, but really there's infinite spiritual levels above that. And so if everybody's going crazy for this one person that felt, a level higher than what we are, so he also should go crazy for people that feel a level above them. And what about the people that feel a level above them? And all of this really boils down to that these levels are wonderful, but if you think that's the end, that's idolatry. You're worshiping a creation. If you think that the world of Bria or Yetzira or even Atzilus, maybe Atzilus, if you think that these upper worlds, they're God, then that's already bordering on idolatry. That's the source of idolatry, that you're not really worshiping the Creator. You're worshiping some sort of creation. Now, for a non-Jew, it's permissible to worship God through one of his creations. But the Jews, we're supposed to use these levels, spiritual levels, as stepping stones to make us realize that whatever level of godliness we see in upper worlds, that's not God. That's just godliness. It says between each one of these infinite levels, that each one is infinitely more real than the level below it, there's what's called a connector, and that connector is called Keter. So as Malchut of Atzilut, the lowest level of Atzilut, that becomes the crown of the world below it, Bria. And Malchut, the lowest level of Bria, that's the, so to speak, the third dimension. Malchut is the fourth highest dimension, and Bria is the below it. The lowest level of Bria, the Malchut, which is the lowest sphere of Bria, this becomes the crown, becomes the highest level of the level below it, Yetzirah. The difference between Keter and Atzilut, and Keter Shebakal Olamot, but we said what? From God's, so to speak, essence to the world of Atzilut, which is just an emanation of God, there's a level of Keter, and there's a Keter in each one of the worlds, connecting one world to the world below it. But there's a big difference between the Keter, the crown, which connects between the essence of God and Atzilut, and the crown, which connects between, let's say, Atzilut and Bria and Yetzirah, etc. What's the difference? Shebakol Olamot, that in all the worlds, I can't recall it was Atzilut, because how does God create the world of Atzilut? This is by means of TzimTzum. Now we're getting a new, you people are going to be big Kabbalists. When we finish this class, you'll be big Kabbalists. You can, how do you say, influence your friends, surprise your friends. What is it? You want to hear something about the TzimTzum? There's the TzimTzum. There's what's called the TzimTzum of Or Ein Sof. Now, TzimTzum means, the simple meaning of TzimTzum means contraction. TzimTzum. Right? Like a person is speaking, you're giving a public speech in someone in front of this, and you start bringing all sorts of examples, and the someone comes up to you, the whatever is the what do they call it? The moderator comes up to you and says TzimTzum, TzimTzum. TzimTzum means lessen what you're saying. Make I say concentrate what you're saying. Don't bring so many examples. Don't bring so many this. TzimTzum. TzimTzum means don't be so wordy. Say a little bit less. Say less. The same thing with God. For God to make the world of Atzilut, he has to be TzimTzum. What does it mean? TzimTzum or Ein Sof, that God has to somehow or other contract, limit his infinite light, liot makom panui, and then there becomes what's called an empty place, v'chalal mamish. Okay, let me give the example. Okay, good. I'll give you the example. Albert Einstein is given the job. He's paid $1 million a year, and he's given a job to teach the theory of relativity in a high school. So he goes. He finds out that he's given a class to give. It wasn't exactly a high school. It was an elementary school. And it wasn't exactly an elementary school, it was third grade. Right, third grade. These kids are just beginning to understand things. Now he has to explain the theory of relativity to third grade kids. What does he do? So he comes in, he starts talking, he realizes nobody understands what he's talking about. He figured maybe he has a class of geniuses. Not only that, he's never, so he says, 1 second. He starts asking them the questions, and then he realizes that they know maybe basic mathematics. You know, what is multiplication? And now he's got a problem. He's got $1 million job. He has to teach these children. What does he do? So he says, okay, I got to teach you the theory of relativity. Okay, class dismissed. Class dismissed. Today we'll all play video games, something like that. And he goes home and he says, how am I going to teach these kids? What am I going to do? I can't. So he says, I have to remove everything that I know about nuclear physics and about whatever it is that, the theory of relativity. And I have to try to understand, who are these kids? What can they understand? How do they work? And he takes a couple of the kids, he calls up their phone. I want to ask you a few questions. And next day he comes in, he gives them a questionnaire, to see really what they understand. And he realizes that like 99.999% of his wisdom, he has to just put to a side. He can't teach them any of those things. He's still got the wisdom, it's still in his mind, but he has to put it aside. And now, so he teaches the children, he says, okay, kids, now I want to teach you the idea of theory of relativity. Relativity, what did you say? We just write down R-E-L, right? Relativity, right? What does it mean? Relativity means that one thing has a relation to another one. What's that mean? For instance, you have a uncle. Yes, that's your relation. That's a relation. A child with an uncle, that's a relation. A son with a father, that's also another relation. And also things in the world have relations. And he starts to talk to them in this very super simple language that it's like almost a pain for him to do. But he's got no choice. He got the job. It's something like that is what God did in order to create Atzilut, the world of Atzilut, which the world of Atzilut is 4 times infinitely more real than our world. Our world is real. The world of Yetzirah is infinitely more real. Bria is infinitely more real than that. Atzilut is Atzilut is infinitely more real than all of them. All. So that's infinite reality. It's like pure God revealed. So that's nothing compared to the essence of God. For the essence of God to come down and make the world of Atzilut, so there has to be a TzimTzum. A TzimTzum. What's a TzimTzum? A TzimTzum means he has to totally remove all of his light. And he has to shine a little tiny bit of creative force, light. And he has to shine a small little ray of reality. That makes the world of Atzilut. So the TzimTzum, God has to make a TzimTzum in Oren Sof to be makom panoi, that there's an empty place, v'chalal mamash. Right? Like Einstein goes home and he sits down and he says, listen, I can't teach these things anything that I know. All these textbooks and everything, I have to put them aside. He leaves a big empty space. What am I going to teach them? So through that empty space, a little tiny beam of reality, I'm going to teach them what the word relativity means. And then I'm going to show them how this applies to other things in the world. Once there was in fact, Einstein did do this. And they even made a movie about it in Disney. I remember I saw it, a movie about the theory of relativity. Walt Disney made it explaining a person standing on a dock and then a train moves. He doesn't know if the dock is moving, if the train is moving. That's the creation. Okay. So in order to create Atzilut, which is the highest of all these worlds, that's like pure godliness, this is only there has to be a tremendous TzimTzum, right? The world of Atzilut, which is the highest world, that's like in our example, the children in the 3rd grade or the 1st grade. In order to teach them, we're talking. They has to. I mean, I don't want to say that Einstein is compared to the essence of God, but what can I do? Who are they? TzimTzum Oren Sof to be makom panoi v'chalal mamish. So there's all this empty reality, so to speak, that's just not shining. Now, when Einstein removes his wisdom from this, it's not that it disappears; it's still there, but it's just not shining. That's in order to create the world of Atzilut. Now the world of Atzilut comes from Atzilut, so to speak, comes Bria. From Bria comes Yetzirah and Asiya. In order to create these worlds from Atzilut to Bria to Yetzirah, that's not TzimTzum. That's means of a parsa. That's like a veil. A veil separates between Atzilut and Bria, and between Bria and Yetzirah. This is all Kabbalah stuff, right? But the reason that he's explaining all this is that we should understand who we're praying to when we pray. What God, how come, how I'd say infinitely real God is. Not that he's infinitely real. He's infinitely real. He's more real than Yetzirah, more real than Bria, more real than Atzilut. The difference between the parsa. What's the difference between the parsa, this veil, which is between these worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, and the makom panoi, and the empty place, which is by the TzimTzum? So we're saying in order to come from God's essence to the world of Atzilut, there has to be a TzimTzum. God has to, so to speak, remove his creative power. The parsa, though, the separation between these lower worlds, this is between one level of creation and an infinitely lower level of creation. The difference between the makom panoi, which came from the TzimTzum, and the parsa, which is between these other worlds, we can understand by what exactly is this TzimTzum. Now he's going to explain what I just told you in my language, and he's going to say in his language, which is more real. Hine, ki hine, or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God. Hainu or v'giloi, a revelation, liot eze hispashtus v'his havus, makor v'chayus, or Ein Sof, sheba atzmuto, namely, spreading out and creation is creation from God's infinite light, from infinite light. How does God create things from his infinity? This is TzimTzum. In other words, coming from God's essence to the world of Atzilut. This is Sheyeshbo or Liot Meir, Umispashat, calls Havos V'chayos, in order that God can create and enliven. How does God do it from his essence? How his essence, God's essence, is infinitely real. The lower worlds couldn't take it, couldn't take such a reality. How can then God create this lower reality and still be everywhere? How can it be? This is Kodem. First of all, the world was created. There had to be, it says, before the world was created, there's a book called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Before the world was created, God and his name were one. Hainu hu ein sof batzmo. There was pure godliness. Ushmo, who, says before the world was created, there was him and his name. Who, God, this is Ein Sof. And God's name, this is the light of Ein Sof, or Ein Sof, which is in God's essence. Shehu rak bechinas shemo. This is only God's name. Shehu bechinas agilu. This is revelation. Hainu mashe yochal liyot, that there can be mitgale umispashet. That's the aspect. God's name is the aspect of God that has the potential to be revealed in the world. Something like a ray of the sun that comes from the sun. When we have a ray of a sunlight is not the sun itself. But sunlight enlivens the whole world, right? It makes all the plants grow and everything like that. But if the sun moves too close to the earth, or the earth to the sun, then it's just too much. That it's just the whole thing just burns up. So he can't, especially if you would put the earth in the middle of the sun, then for sure there wouldn't be any. Right? So there has to be beams of light that come from the sun. The same thing is, this beam of light, this is a ray, sheyesh b'shemesh, which is already in the sun, le'ir al or, to shine up the earth, and the sun itself, hari gufa shemesh, namely the body of the sun itself, hinei or, the light, hayotzem yeshemesh, which comes from the sun. This is called by the name of light, a beam of light. Kamosh Katuv, like it says, Vayikra Elokim La'or Yom, that God called to this beam of light, the light that comes from the sun, he called day. Okay, now the fact is, okay, let's just leave it that way. I mean, the fact is, this beam of light that came, this was before the sun was created. Light existed before the sun was created. Light is, the sun was created, the sun just partakes of this reality which is called light. The same thing with time. Time existed before God created the world, so to speak. Not exact time, but the plan of time, the idea of what time was going to be. There's different opinions in Kabbalah about this also. But nevertheless, all this, that's why it says the word Breshit contained everything. Everything was created, and then afterwards everything came out little by little. Okay, I just want to stress again, the reason that we're learning all this is just to give us a little bit of an idea of how infinitely great God is, how infinitely lucky we are that God is creating us, and how also, despite the fact that God is so great and infinite to a level that's impossible to even begin to comprehend, he listens to our prayers. So when we're praying to God, we have to pray to God like we're praying to a person. In other words, that God will respond, God does listen, God does care. We're not trying to remove God from a personal experience. God did give the Torah. He is giving the Torah. The Torah is God's will. We're just trying to explain here who we're talking to. Who we're talking to. I know there were cases where, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I'm just giving an example. The Rebbe, he used to walk home, and and sometimes there were little children. He would stop and talk to the children. I heard a story like this similar about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. When he would leave, he was a very great rabbi, a very, very great rabbi, very well known, very well known, he had a big yeshiva and etc. The Rebbe, and when he would walk in the streets, he would sometimes talk to kids, little kids. Now the little child, he just thought it was a nice man talking to him. He didn't know. He didn't know it was. Oh, there's a video. I remember there's a video. This black guy, he was speaking, and he became something like, some sort of an official there in the Crown Heights area. And he said when the Rebbe would walk home, so he and his brother sometimes they would argue, and they would fight over the baseball or something. They lived on the same street where the Rebbe lives, and the Rebbe would stop and say, "You boys shouldn't argue. You're brothers. You should care about each other." And he would give them a little word, and then he would give them dollars. He said he's kept the dollar right now. He said we had no idea who this man was. We didn't know that this man was like a world leader and that he was tremendously important. A nice guy, was a nice person. Well, that's the same thing. That's what we're explaining over here. That God is infinitely more than we think. But God is a nice guy. God is friendly. God is user friendly. God loves you. God wants you to pray to him. Whether you're a Jew, you're not a Jew, you're a sinner, you're whatever it is. God is infinitely close to everybody. Everybody. Directly. It's in Psalms, Psalm 145. What sentence? I don't know. Looking over the sentence 13 or something. God is infinitely close to everybody. God is close to everybody who calls to him. So all this we're talking about, this Kabbalah stuff, and it's very interesting, and it's very inspiring. And it's especially inspiring that we should have fear of God. We have to know who we're dealing with over here. This is not just religion. This is not just how do you say sometimes words jump from my mind. that we do these these we go through these motions. We have to do these things, and we have our customs, and we have our this. That's all true, but that's not so. We're serving the creator of the universe, the creator of the universe. And we're saying creator of the universe. This doesn't mean the physical universe. It also means the spiritual one. And the spiritual universe, you don't know what it is. You know what it is. And as soon as you start to realize what the spiritual universe is, then I got a surprise for you. That's also a tremendously low level. There's levels of the spiritual universe which are infinitely higher. That's what we're talking about. So there has to be, it says, in order to come down from God's essence to the highest of the spiritual levels, which is Atzilut, which is in a way not even spiritual. It's above the spiritual. That has to be what's called a TzimTzum. God has to, so to speak, remove all of his light. Like we said, that Einstein removes all of his wisdom and his thoughts in order to, a little tiny sort of a ray of reality comes down and creates Atzilut, which is the highest of all the world. And then from Atzilut to Bria, there also has to be a concealment, but that's not a contraction. That's a concealment. From Atzilut to Bria, it's also infinite. It's a jump from one infinite level to a level which is infinitely lower than it, but it doesn't require the same drastic change as TzimTzum. That requires only what's called a parsa which separates between. Like, for instance, we see a ray of the sun coming from the sun. Like it says, the two big lights. So it is in the infinite light of God that the light is called revelation, that comes from him, and the creation of the light and the life force, and that's what comes from God. But Ein Sof Ba'atzmo, but the infinite light, infiniteness of God, that's like the sun. This is the source. Shu Makor, this is the source of the light, and from it comes. Well, so we have an example. God is like the sun, and the rays of God that come from the sun, that's like all these spiritual worlds. Right? Okay, now let's go. A little bit more, just 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. TzimTzum, this TzimTzum was in the infinite light of God, namely the infinite light of God became included in its source. Like I said, with Einstein, he didn't just dissolve all of his knowledge. He just became like a third grade child. He took his knowledge and he hid it. He withdrew it, but it's still in his mind. It's still there. Because the worlds are not able to accept the essence revelation of God like it is in its essence. Therefore, God had to make this TzimTzum. If God would reveal too much, they would be negated totally. Therefore, TzimTzum, or therefore God contracted the light. Just to continue my metaphor that I'm using, right? If Einstein came into the class and he started teaching these children, what the theory of relativity is, and he sees the kids don't understand anything, right? And they're starting to talk. He says, just listen, don't talk, listen. And the kids are sitting there and they don't understand one word, what he's talking about. They can't understand what the words are. They don't understand the connection between the words. They start crying. They don't know what to do, right? And he just goes on. Is it that the next day no one's going to come to class? The same thing as God. If God would try to create the world from his essence, there wouldn't be able to be a world, right? There would be a world, and there would be nothing. So God therefore has to do this thing called the TzimTzum, by means of which he withdraws, so to speak, his knowledge, his light, his creative force, and that leaves what we call an empty place. Liot rak bekoach, so that God's light, his creative force, becomes potential and not actual. Like in the example I'm giving, Einstein has to remove all of his knowledge. It's just potential. He doesn't give it over, but it's still there. So God removes his, so to speak, the revelation of his godliness in the world. The yitalim bo, it's concealed inside of God. Shalo yegila, that shouldn't be revealed. There shouldn't be revealed the light, only the me'or. So this explains another thing. God, in order to create the world, and the creation of the world is constant, it's every moment. But that doesn't mean that God is not here, that God is somehow or other concealed himself. God did not conceal himself. Just like Einstein, the same Einstein is there in the room and he's teaching, he's got all this knowledge inside of himself. Right? Maybe the kids don't appreciate it. He just looks like an old man with wild hair. The same thing with God, so to speak, right? that God does not reveal himself in the spiritual ways, in the spiritual worlds, like it is in heaven, for instance, it doesn't mean that God is not here. It's all part of this is all within, if you want to call it, the oneness of God. It says, or the godliness himself, lo shayach, it's not possible that God can contract himself. God can't even conceal himself. Exactly the opposite. Pure godliness is always revealed. And therefore, even children, they know that there is God and they pray to God. How do they say there's no atheists in foxholes? They say when a person is in danger, he calls out to God. He calls out to the essence of God. They might even call God by a different name, but God is available to everyone. Even though the people don't have any idea. A child doesn't have any idea. He doesn't know anything about these TzimTzums and things like that. A small child, he calls out to God. There's just no revelation of light of God. But God himself, of course, he's everywhere. He's above, he's below. And therefore, this TzimTzum, when we talked about this contraction, is called an empty place. And a halal, another word for empty place. What does it mean? That it's empty from the revelation of God. She'ein bo or v'izkalus klal. Ella nish'ar b'bechinas me'or. It remains in the emanator. Like we said, like the soul. The soul, when it comes into the body, you can see it revealed when it's in the body. It moves your limbs, it moves your arm. But before the soul comes into the body, even though that it's got the power and the life force in order to enliven the body, but nevertheless, we see that the life force of the soul is only potential. It only becomes activated when it comes into the body. calls them on all the time. Shalom nitlabsha dayan. It's not in the body in order to give life to it. So your soul, before you were born, you existed, right? Before you were born, you existed. The soul existed. The soul existed. Even before you were conceived, right? The soul existed. And it had the potential to enliven a body. So where is it? It's potential. The same thing with God. God is everywhere. But his revelation isn't potential. Only potential. It's not actual. But sometimes we see big miracles. God answers prayers. And God answers even prayers to people that don't even pray to him. They pray to some sort of idol or something like that. And God answers prayers because the people are directing their prayers to God. There's also times that people pray to idols and God answers them. Sometimes even the idols answer them. And it could be the people, they pray for success. You have, Stalin, who knows, Hitler, these people, they had tremendous success. I don't know if they were praying to anybody, but you see that they got tremendous success. All the people the enemies of the Jews, the Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, all these people, they had tremendous success. But that's not coming from the essence of God. That's not coming from the essence of God. Okay, here we're not talking about that. Here we're talking about pure good, pure godliness. The Kenyan Ish Chachman, a person that's let's say very wise, and his wisdom is spread out to others, then even to himself, when he's talking or teaching others, like the example I gave you about Einstein. The only reason I bring that is because Einstein is a well-known genius, right? A genius. But when the idna, in the time when a person is not teaching others, then his wisdom is only in potential in his soul. He's got the potential to think ideas or to work in new concepts of a low ball, but it hasn't been revealed yet from being real. And also the power of seeing in your eye. Even though if you close your eye, the eye has a power of seeing, but it doesn't become revealed because the eye sees, but it's not activated until you open up your eye. And also the power of walking in your feet and similar things. So on this, by means of this, the same thing we can understand by God. That's the idea of the TzimTzum in Or Ein Sof. The TzimTzum of Or Ein Sof means that God puts all of his revealed power. On Mount Sinai, for instance, God revealed himself. This revelation of God is still here, but it's in potential. It's not in actual. And the more and more that God withdraws it to be in potential, that's the more we're, so to speak, in exile. That's how God created the world. So we're saying God created the world already. The world depends on God being hidden from us. And we're going to continue this, God willing, tomorrow, trying to understand God, the essence of God, the reality of God, the greatness of God, the power of God, and how it's really right here, and why it is we don't see it, why we don't feel it. As we'll talk about more tomorrow. Now let's do the Devar Malchut.